The Maya civilization was a Mesoamerican civilization developed by the Maya peoples, and noted for its hieroglyphic script, the only known fully developed writing system of the pre-Columbian Americas, as well as for its art, architecture, mathematics, calendar, and astronomical system. The Maya civilization developed in an area that encompasses southeastern Mexico, all of Guatemala and Belize, and the western portions of Honduras and El Salvador. This region consists of the northern lowlands encompassing the Yucatán Peninsula and the highlands of the Sierra Madre, running from the Mexican state of Chiapas across southern Guatemala and onwards into El Salvador, and the southern lowlands of the Pacific littoral plain. The Archaic period, prior to 2000 BC, saw the first developments in agriculture and the earliest villages. The pre-classic period saw the establishment of the first complex societies in the Maya region, and the cultivation of the staple crops of the Maya diet, including maize, beans, squashes, and chili peppers. The first Maya cities developed around 750 BC, and by 500 BC these cities possessed monumental architecture, including large temples with elaborate stucco facades. Hieroglyphic writing was being used in the Maya region by the 3rd century BC. In the late pre-classic, a number of large cities developed in the Petén Basin, and Caminaljuyu rose to prominence in the Guatemalan highlands. Beginning around 250 AD, the classic period is largely defined as when the Maya were raising sculpted monuments with long count dates. This period saw the Maya civilization develop a large number of city-states linked by a complex trade network. In the Maya lowlands, two great rivals, Tikal and Calakmul, became powerful. The classic period also saw the intrusive intervention of the central Mexican city of Teotihuacan in Maya dynastic politics. In the 9th century, there was a widespread political collapse in the central Maya region, resulting in internecine warfare, the abandonment of cities, and a northward shift of population. The post-classic period saw the rise of Chichen Itza in the north, and the expansion of the aggressive Quiche kingdom in the Guatemalan highlands. In the 16th century, the Spanish Empire colonized the Mesoamerican region, and a lengthy series of campaigns saw the fall of Nojpatén, the last Maya city, in 1697. Classic period rule was centered on the concept of the divine king, who acted as a mediator between mortals and the supernatural realm. Kingship was patrilineal, and power would normally pass to the eldest son. A prospective king was also expected to be a successful war leader. Maya politics was dominated by a closed system of patronage, although the exact political makeup of the kingdom varied from city-state to city-state. By the late Classic, the aristocracy had greatly increased, resulting in the corresponding reduction in the exclusive power of the divine king. The Maya civilization developed highly sophisticated art forms, and the Maya created art using both perishable and non-perishable materials, including wood, jade, obsidian, ceramics, sculpted stone monuments, stucco, and finely painted murals. Maya cities tended to expand haphazardly, and the city center would be occupied by ceremonial and administrative complexes, surrounded by an irregular sprawl of residential districts. Different parts of a city would often be linked by causeways. The principal architecture of the city consisted of palaces, pyramid temples, ceremonial bulk courts, and structures aligned for astronomical observation. The Maya elite were literate, and developed a complex system of hieroglyphic writing that was the most advanced in the pre-Columbian Americas. The Maya recorded the history and ritual knowledge in screen-fold books, of which only 3 uncontested examples remain, the rest having been destroyed by the Spanish. There are also a great many examples of Maya text found on stelae and ceramics. The Maya developed a highly complex series of interlocking ritual calendars, and employed mathematics that included one of the earliest instances of the explicit zero in the world. As a part of the religion, the Maya practiced human sacrifice. Mesoamerica. The Maya civilization developed within the Mesoamerican cultural area, which covers a region that spreads from northern Mexico southwards into Central America. Mesoamerica was one of 6 cradles of civilization worldwide. The Mesoamerican area gave rise to a series of cultural developments that included complex societies, agriculture, cities, monumental architecture, writing, and calendrical systems. The set of traits shared by Mesoamerican cultures also included astronomical knowledge, blood and human sacrifice, and a cosmovision that viewed the world as divided into 4 divisions aligned with the cardinal directions, each with different attributes, and a 3-way division of the world into the celestial realm, the earth, and the underworld. By 6000 BC, the early inhabitants of Mesoamerica were experimenting with the domestication of plants, a process that eventually led to the establishment of sedentary agricultural societies. The diverse climate allowed for wide variation in available crops, but all regions of Mesoamerica cultivated the base crops of maize, beans, and squashes. All Mesoamerican cultures used Stone Age technology. After c. 1000 AD, copper, silver and gold were worked. Mesoamerica lacked draft animals, did not use the wheel, and possessed few domesticated animals. The principal means of transport was on foot or by canoe. Mesoamericans viewed the world as hostile and governed by unpredictable deities. The ritual Mesoamerican ball game was widely played. Mesoamerica is linguistically diverse, with most languages falling within a small number of language families. The major families are Mayan, Mixocayan, Otomangan, and Uto-Aztecan. There are also a number of smaller families and isolates. The Mesoamerican language area shares a number of important features, including widespread loanwords, and use of a vigesimal number system. The territory of the Maya covered a third of Mesoamerica, and the Maya were engaged in a dynamic relationship with neighboring cultures that included the Olmecs, Mixtecs, Teotihuacan, the Aztecs, and others. During the early Classic period, the Maya cities of Tikal and Caminaljuyu were key Maya foci in a network that extended beyond the Maya area into the highlands of central Mexico. At around the same time, there was a strong Maya presence at the Tetetla compound of Teotihuacan. Centuries later, during the 9th century AD, murals at Cacaxtla, another site in the central Mexican highlands, were painted in a Maya style. This may have been either an effort to align itself with the still powerful Maya area after the collapse of Teotihuacan and ensuing political fragmentation in the Mexican highlands, or an attempt to express a distant Maya origin of the inhabitants. The Maya city of Chichen Itza and the distant Toltec capital of Tula had an especially close relationship. Geography. The Maya civilization occupied a wide territory that included southeastern Mexico and northern Central America. This area included the entire Yucatán Peninsula and all of the territory now incorporated into the modern countries of Guatemala and Belize, as well as the western portions of Honduras and El Salvador. Most of the peninsula is formed by a vast plain with few hills or mountains and a generally low coastline. The Petén region consists of densely forested low-lying limestone plain. A chain of 14 lakes runs across the central drainage basin of Petén. To the south the plain gradually rises towards the Guatemalan highlands. Dense forest covers northern Petén and Belize, most of Quintana Roo, southern Campeche, and a portion of the south of Yucatán state. Farther north, the vegetation turns to lower forest consisting of dense scrub. The littoral zone of Soconusco lies to the south of the Sierra Madre de Chiapas, and consists of a narrow coastal plain and the foothills of the Sierra Madre. The Maya highlands extend eastwards from Chiapas into Guatemala, reaching the highest in the Sierra de los Catumatenes. The major pre-Columbian population centers of the highlands were located in the largest highland valleys, such as the Valley of Guatemala and the Caltenango Valley in the southern highlands, a belt of volcanic cones running parallel to the Pacific coast. The highlands extend northwards into Verapaz, and gradually descend to the east. History. The history of Maya civilization is divided into three principal periods: the pre-classic, classic, and post-classic periods. These were preceded by the Archaic period, during which the first settled villages and early developments in agriculture emerged. Modern scholars regard these periods as arbitrary divisions of Maya chronology, rather than indicative of cultural evolution and decline. Definitions of the start and end dates of period spans can vary by as much as a century, depending on the author. Pre-classic period. The Maya developed the first civilization in the pre-classic period. Scholars continue to discuss when this era of Maya civilization began. Maya occupation at Cuello has been carbon dated to around 2600 BC. Settlements were established around 1800 BC in the Soconusco region of the Pacific coast, and the Maya were already cultivating the staple crops of maize, beans, squash, and chili pepper. This period was characterized by sedentary communities and the introduction of pottery and fired clay figurines. During the Middle Pre-Classic period, small villages began to grow to form cities. Negbe in the Petén department of Guatemala is the earliest well-documented city in the Maya lowlands, where large structures have been dated to around 750 BC. The northern lowlands of Yucatán were widely settled by the Middle Pre-Classic. By approximately 400 BC, early Maya rulers were raising stelae. A developed script was already being used in Petén by the 3rd century BC. In the late pre-classic period, the enormous city of El Mirador grew to cover approximately 16 square kilometers. Although not as large, Tikal was already a significant city by around 350 BC. In the highlands, Camaljuyu emerged as a principal center in the late pre-classic. Takal Kbaj and Chocada were two of the most important cities on the Pacific coastal plain, and Comchin grew to become an important site in northern Yucatán. The late pre-classic cultural florescence collapsed in the 1st century AD and many of the great Maya cities of the epoch were abandoned. The cause of this collapse is unknown. Classic period. The Classic period is largely defined as the period during which the lowland Maya raised dated monuments using the long count calendar. This period marked the peak of large-scale construction and urbanism, the recording of monumental inscriptions, and demonstrated significant intellectual and artistic development, particularly in the southern lowland regions. The Classic period Maya political landscape has been likened to that of Renaissance Italy or classical Greece, with multiple city-states engaged in a complex network of alliances and enmities. The largest cities had populations numbering 50,000 to 120,000 and were linked to networks of subsidiary sites. During the early Classic, cities throughout the Maya region were influenced by the great metropolis of Teotihuacan in the distant Valley of Mexico. In AD 300 678, Teotihuacan decisively intervened at Tikal and other nearby cities, deposed the rulers, and installed a new Teotihuacan-backed dynasty. This intervention was led by Archaic, who arrived at Tikal in early 378. The king of Tikal, Chactoquichirikai, died on the same day, suggesting a violent takeover. A year later, Archaic oversaw the installation of a new king, Jaxnunahianai. The installation of the new dynasty led to a period of political dominance when Tikal became the most powerful city in the central lowlands. Tikal's great rival was Calakmul, another powerful city in the Petén Basin. Tikal and Calakmul both developed extensive systems of allies and vassals. Lesser cities that entered one of these networks gained prestige from their association with the top-tier city, and maintained peaceful relations with other members of the same network. Tikal and Calakmul engaged in the maneuvering of their alliance networks against each other. At various points during the Classic period, one or other of these powers would gain a strategic victory over its great rival, resulting in respective periods of florescence and decline. In 629, the Alaj Chankawil, a son of the Tikal king Kanich Muwanjol II, was sent to found a new city at Dos Palas, in the Pitaxpachan region, apparently as an outpost to extend Tikal's power beyond the reach of Calakmul. For the next 2 decades he fought loyally for his brother and overlord at Tikal. In 648, King Yanumchin II of Calakmul captured Balaj Chankawil. Yanumchin II then reinstated Balaj Chankawil upon the throne of Dos Palas as his vassal. He thereafter served as a loyal ally of Calakmul. In the southeast, Copan was the most important city. Its Classic period dynasty was founded in 426 by Kanichaksk Mo. The new king had strong ties with central Petén and Teotihuacan. Copan reached the height of its cultural and artistic development during the rule of Uahakladuan Ubah Kawawil, who ruled from 695 to 738. His reign ended catastrophically when he was captured by his vassal, King Tilyuchan, part of Quirigua. The captured lord of Copan was taken back to Quirigua and was decapitated in a public ritual. It is likely that this coup was backed by Calakmul in order to weaken a powerful ally of Tikal. Palenque and Yaxchilan were the most powerful cities in the Usumacinta region. In the highlands, Camanaljuyu in the valley of Guatemala was already a sprawling city by 300. In the north of the Maya area, Coba was the most important capital. Classic Maya collapsed during the 9th century AD. The central Maya region suffered major political collapse marked by the abandonment of cities, the ending of dynasties, and a northward shift in activity. No universally accepted theory explains this collapse, but it likely had a combination of causes, including endemic internecine warfare, overpopulation resulting in severe environmental degradation, and drought. During this period, known as the Terminal Classic, the northern cities of Chichen Itza and Uxmal showed increased activity. Major cities in the northern Yucatán Peninsula continued to be inhabited long after the cities of the southern lowlands ceased to raise monuments. Classic Maya social organization was based on the ritual authority of the ruler rather than central control of trade and food distribution. This model of rulership was poorly structured to respond to changes, because the ruler's actions were limited by tradition to such activities as construction, ritual, and warfare. This only served to exacerbate systemic problems. By the 9th and 10th centuries, this resulted in collapse of this system of rulership. In the northern Yucatan, individual rule was replaced by a ruling council formed from elite lineages. In the southern Yucatan and central Petén, kingdoms declined in western Petén and some other areas. The changes were catastrophic and resulted in the rapid depopulation of cities. Within a couple of generations, large swathes of the central Maya area were all but abandoned. Both the capitals and the secondary centers were generally abandoned within a period of 50 to 100 years. One by one, cities stopped sculpting dated monuments. The last long count date was inscribed at Tonina in 909. Stelae were no longer raised, and squatters moved into abandoned royal palaces. Mesoamerican trade routes shifted and bypassed Petén. Post-Classic period. Although much reduced, a significant Maya presence remained into the post-Classic period. After the abandonment of the major Classic period cities, the population was particularly concentrated near permanent water sources. Unlike during previous cycles of contraction in the Maya region, abandoned lands were not quickly resettled in the post-Classic. Activity shifted to the northern lowlands and the Maya highlands. This may have involved migration from the southern lowlands, because many post-Classic Maya groups had migration myths. Chichen Itza and its PUUC neighbors declined dramatically in the 11th century, and this may represent the final episode of Classic period collapse. After the decline of Chichen Itza, the Maya region lacked a dominant power until the rise of the city of Mayapan in the 12th century. New cities arose near the Caribbean and Gulf coasts, and new trade networks were formed. The post-Classic period was marked by changes from the preceding Classic period. The once great city of Camonaljuyu in the valley of Guatemala was abandoned after continuous occupation of almost 2,000 years. Across the highlands and neighboring Pacific coast, long-occupied cities in exposed locations were relocated, apparently due to a proliferation of warfare. Cities came to occupy more easily defended hilltop locations surrounded by deep ravines, with ditch and wall defenses sometimes supplementing the protection provided by the natural terrain. One of the most important cities in the Guatemalan highlands at this time was Cumaguay, the capital of the aggressive Quiche kingdom. The government of Maya states, from the Yucatan to the Guatemalan highlands, was often organized as joint rule by council. However, in practice one member of the council could act as a supreme ruler, while the other members served him as advisors. Mayapan was abandoned around 1448, after a period of political, social and environmental turbulence that in many ways echoed the Classic period collapse in the southern Maya region. The abandonment of the city was followed by a period of prolonged warfare, disease and natural disasters in the Yucatán Peninsula, which ended only shortly before Spanish contact in 1511. Even without a dominant regional capital, the early Spanish explorers reported wealthy coastal cities and thriving marketplaces. During the late post-Classic, the Yucatán Peninsula was divided into a number of independent provinces that shared a common culture but varied in internal socio-political organization. On the eve of the Spanish conquest, the highlands of Guatemala were dominated by several powerful Maya states. The Quiche had carved out a small empire covering a large part of the western Guatemalan highlands and the neighboring Pacific coastal plain. However, in the decades before the Spanish invasion, the Cachucal kingdom had been steadily eroding the kingdom of the Quiche. Contact period and Spanish conquest. In 1511, a Spanish caravel was wrecked in the Caribbean, and about a dozen survivors made landfall on the coast of Yucatan. They were seized by a Maya lord, and most were sacrificed, although two managed to escape. From 1517 to 1519, 3 separate Spanish expeditions explored the Yucatan coast, and engaged in a number of battles with the Maya inhabitants. After the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan fell to the Spanish in 1521, Hernán Cortés dispatched Pedro de Alvarado to Guatemala with 180 cavalry, 300 infantry, 4 cannons, and thousands of allied warriors from central Mexico. They arrived in Soconusco in 1523. The Quiche capital, Cumacae, fell to Alvarado in 1524. Shortly afterwards, the Spanish were invited as allies into Ixumchi, the capital city of the Kaqchikal Maya. Good relations did not last, due to excessive Spanish demands for gold as tribute, and the city was abandoned a few months later. This was followed by the fall of Zacalu, the Maya capital, in 1525. Francisco de Montejo and his son, Francisco de Montejo the Younger, launched a long series of campaigns against the polities of the Yucatán Peninsula in 1527, and finally completed the conquest of the northern portion of the peninsula in 1546. This left only the Maya kingdoms of the Petén Basin independent. In 1697, Martin de Ursua launched an assault on the Itza capital Nojpetén, and the last independent Maya city fell to the Spanish. Persistence of Maya culture. The Spanish conquest stripped away most of the defining features of Maya civilization. However, many Maya villages remained remote from Spanish colonial authority, and for the most part continued to manage their own affairs. Maya communities and the nuclear family maintained the traditional day-to-day life. The basic Mesoamerican diet of maize and beans continued, although agricultural output was improved by the introduction of steel tools. Traditional crafts such as weaving, ceramics, and basketry continued to be practiced. Community markets and trade in local products continued long after the conquest. At times, the colonial administration encouraged the traditional economy in order to extract tribute in the form of ceramics or cotton textiles. Although these were usually made to European specifications, Maya beliefs and language proved resistant to change despite vigorous efforts by Catholic missionaries. The 260-day Zocan ritual calendar continues in use in modern Maya communities in the highlands of Guatemala and Chiapas, and millions of Mayan language speakers inhabit the territory in which their ancestors developed the civilization. Investigation of Maya civilization. The agents of the Catholic Church wrote detailed accounts of the Maya, in support of their efforts at evangelization and absorption of the Maya into the Spanish Empire. This was followed by various Spanish priests and colonial officials who left descriptions of ruins they visited in Yucatan and Central America. In 1839, American traveler and writer John Lloyd Stephens set out to visit a number of Maya sites with English architect and draftsman Frederick Catherwood. Their illustrated accounts of the ruins sparked strong popular interest, and brought the Maya to the attention of the world. The later 19th century saw the recording and recovery of ethno-historic accounts of the Maya, and the first steps in deciphering Maya hieroglyphs. The final 2 decades of the 19th century saw the birth of modern scientific archaeology in the Maya region, with the meticulous work of Alfred Maudsley and Teberto Mela. By the early 20th century, the Peabody Museum was sponsoring excavations at Copan and in the Yucatán Peninsula. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, advances were made in deciphering the Maya calendar and identifying deities, dates, and religious concepts. Since the 1930s, archaeological exploration increased dramatically, with large-scale excavations across the Maya region. In the 1960s, the distinguished Mayanist J. Eric S. Thompson promoted the ideas that Maya cities were essentially vacant ceremonial centers serving a dispersed population in the forest, and that the Maya civilization was governed by peaceful astronomer priests. These ideas began to collapse with major advances in the decipherment of the script in the late 20th century, pioneered by Heinrich Berlin, Tatiana Proskuryakov, and Yuri Norizov. With breakthroughs in understanding of Maya script since the 1950s, the texts revealed the warlike activities of the classic Maya kings, and the view of the Maya as peaceful could no longer be supported. Detailed settlement surveys of Maya cities revealed the evidence of large populations, putting an end to the vacant ceremonial center model.